Verehrte Frau Flick,
Mrs. Flick, ladies and gentlemen, the common good is a formula, as you put it just now, which is slightly obsolete and is considered to be not modern. Now, if we look at the Latin translation, bonum commune, that it sounds even more obsolete or antiquated. But I believe there's good reason to place this term or this notion in its time, that is the 21st century, but you have to do so in a circumspect manner. Carl Schmitt talked about the bonum commune, and he put it succinctly: those who say and talk about bonum commune is a fraudster, and therefore we should be careful not to be considered fraudsters here talking about this term. Now, where does this notion come from? Well, it comes from the fact that the comparison or the juxtaposition of common good and, say, selfishness has been used frequently in order to fight liberal democracy. In a liberal democracy, we think about this term like Article 14 Article 14, paragraph 2 of our basic law. In Section 1, private ownership is guaranteed as a right of freedom. Paragraph 2 or paragraph 2 says, ownership is a duty and obligation. Using it is to serve the common good at the same time. So this is a guiding principle from our basic law, which will guide the, say, liberal treatment of this term. So there are certain rights in an order which is considered to be a kind of a community, and which also assumes at the right time that we, as reasonable and sensible people, develop in such a way that we respect the opposite number and do not consider it, him or her, as an instrument of our own egotistical objectives. Modern theories assume that substantial determination of common good, that is, what is common good? Is it the climate protection objective? 2 degrees, is this a common good? Well, we can discuss this. Is it more reasonable to accept climate change and channel the resources of humankind to reduce, say, or minimize damages? So this is a substantial discussion about common good. And in parliamentary democracies, we got used to the fact that everything is being determined along procedures. So it is the legislator who is going to take a decision, which means the majority in a democracy. If the German Bundestag, like in the late 50s, says that the peaceful use of nuclear energy is one of the common good obligations, because only then we will be able to safeguard and secure our future. And those of you who are a bit older will certainly understand, will remember this phase. You know, all problems were to be solved using nuclear energy. So in procedural terms, then this was the common good of the young Federal Republic of Germany. But if later the Bundestag decides to phase out the use of nuclear energy and says this is also for the common good, then of course I'm sure or we will be sure that this will be put into practice or in effect. Now, if we talk about a legitimate instance which was legitimized by elections, and they decide to adopt such a law, then, you know, the story has come to an end. But, as you know, this is not the end of the story. What is the meaning of science? What is the meaning of ethics? If you do not look at substantial materialistic connotations of this term, common good. So this means we've got a mixed relationship of procedural or the definition of this kind of common good and a substantial discourse of this term. So what is common good in our society, taking into account our normative procedures? The constitutional law is certainly not the only place where people discuss the substantial determination of common good is being discussed, meaning the determination of state objectives. The state theory and other theories also make a scientific contribution, and even more so, it is also about the public forming an opinion. It is about the attitudes and ideas about basic objectives of politics and the states, and to shift these ideas and notions. Between scientific and political decision-making processes, we have kind of transitions, and we have ideas of what might help to push things forward. And this will make you understand where Carl Schmitt's skepticism comes from. A strategic objective and define it as something of the common good will always substantiate or reinforce the opinion-building process, and it is also something which will take into account criticisms. If individual public transport or individual transport is to be implemented using electric vehicles and all this for the benefit of the common weal, then criticism will not surface. Then any questions and issues about the ecological footprint or audits will no longer be of relevance. And this, of course, all against the backdrop of our common good. Now, convictions, and these convictions will not relieve us of the obligation to use scientific instruments to question deeply what is the purpose of this objective and which objective is reasonable. And when talking about common good, we can say the process of globalization has been influenced. Most players understand globalization to mean an increase of economic, scientific, and communicative means of transportations, and this across state boundaries. Globalized economy or business is not something which considers the entire world as a sales market. This is an idea which is quite old, but it also includes the entire process, the process of development and production of goods, providing services, and this all under the aspect of division of labor and organize everything on a global scale. So this means we talk about world societies because the traditional notions of a society being a national society might no longer be true. So we are talking about global structures in this context. Now, the question arises how world societies can define common good. You see, in Western countries, or countries influenced by Western cultures, the answer seems to be obvious, because from the Western point of view, you mentioned Aristotle and Plato, so the particular polis, the community, is considered to be something which is universal. Polis can be delineated clearly, and so you might consider it a representation of all of the world. Therefore, antique philosophy was thinking along universal lines, and this hasn't changed. We are all embedded in societies, but at the same time, we use cosmopolitan ideas, because our idea of human rights, affects all people, so the same rights for everyone. So this global horizon makes it very difficult to define common good nevertheless, because the bonum community can be considered, preconditions a community. And the community of people is hardly, say, operable and might even be counterproductive, because people in societies, even smaller communities, that is, communities smaller than the traditional state, will organize themselves in this way. And even Immanuel Kant was warning us for such a kind of a limited notion. So when talking about the world, we cannot necessarily resort to such definitions of a common good. How can we define common good for the world? Who is entitled to do so? A world parliament? Very difficult. The OECD, maybe the participants of the WTO, and they are asked to take into account more and more common good aspects. Are these the closer or increasingly closer ties between or among nations? You mentioned that in your presentation. Now, is this a place where common good is being formed, might even influence, affect people? Are we talking about supranational organizations like the European Union? Could this be a role model for the world, like people said about 20 years ago? So this is what the experts of European science considered to be a matter of fact. But legitimate violence has not yet left the societies or this union of states in Europe. So when talking about globalism, we still have to tie this notion of common good to the individual states for the time being, and therefore we also have respective procedures which were defined accordingly. So in our global times, in this global era, we say that the legitimate places of producing or creating rules which apply to everyone can not define common good in a universal way. And this is not a surprise, because the liberal society, and we're talking about the public or the aristocracy circles, always involved, this way of thinking, any say mind. So people started reasoning about what is to be decided. So this is a complementary relationship, and this is being reflected on a global level. And here we have NGOs these days. This is a closely knit network of players who consider or define themselves as someone doing things for the common good, and sometimes states in their, say, blank egotism cannot perceive common good or pursue common good. On the contrary, they are our adversaries. We have to fight it with more discipline, because they build or develop, say, props where, say, the egotism of the sovereign rulers is important more so than that of the citizens. And then we've got the common good related to climate, environment, breaking down or eliminating injustices in this world. And the respective sides place their ideas in the center stage. Now, this is something which you found in national states, and it will certainly not become better simply by placing everything or working along these lines on a global stage. This antagonistic comparison of idiosyncrasy or egotism on the one hand and the common good on the other side is certainly an aspect which has been embedded in our societies influenced by Western culture. This refers to personalities as well as the sociableness of people. So on an international level, we have to look at the awareness and the claim of states to be independent, but at the same time they are, pursuing objectives, say, together and trade goods. So, and therefore, it is very important to analyze what happens in the Western world. You have the United States, which always have had problems, to implement inside the countries using the Congress whatever their presidents, announced to the world. So let's say we do not want to take part in such a system like the Paris Accord, or if the UK says and announces that this kind of European integration, getting closer and closer to each other to take on more and more commitments and obligations, will destroy the balance, and therefore we refuse to take part. Reflected in Brexit, of course. Now, this is a remarkable development, and I believe this is an important point in time, because now we face the question, shall we simply pretend as if the old Atlantic signatories, the United States and Great Britain, are walking along an erroneous path and hope that sooner or later they will come back to our course, which we follow? Or shall we be a bit more, say, cautious and define the global common good along new lines, taking these developments into account? The world of the 21st century cannot be seen within the narrow boundaries or borders of national states, then I believe this is correct. The number of global problems will increase with an increasing number of, with an increasingly dense network of relationships and connections. If then there are political, legal, or ethical objectives and implement them, then this is something which shows that we've made a lot of progress if you compare it with things of the past. A country like China or India, they do not want to face this definition of common good. They discuss aspects with us on an international stage, but at the same time, and surely, pursue their own interests and objectives. And this is not something which is unusual, because we too pursue our own objectives. If it is like a sugar cube in hot tea, and if the common good is dissolved in such a liquid, and everyone holds him or herself back, saying, I haven't got this kind of egotism, then this is certainly a wrong approach. Yes, we've something to say. The Germans, the French, the Danes in the European Union, and then the European Union has to talk about its interests in the world and at the same time say, where are our common interests? Where are our common interests in order to keep this world stable, to keep this world a peaceful world, a world which is lasting, sustainable, and does not damage its own or destroy its own resources? Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we have reached a stage that we perceive this not only in one country, not only on a continent, but obviously everywhere. Now it is all about finding a balance which is similar to Article 14, Section 2 of our German Basic Law. That is, the freedom of action determined for Germany is to be implemented in the dealings of different nations in the world, but do it in a civilized and cultivated way, i.e. on a global stage in this way. I believe this is the kind of playing field which we are moving on, or which we should move on, if we want to discuss and define common good objectives together. It is not only about the NGOs doing something instead of countries, states. No, they are the ones who offer additional advice or trigger things off, but they are not the representatives of democracies and other states. I know that we are, say, in our infancy, at the beginning, and this means we have to make progress, knowing this is a new challenge, and maybe also knowing that this will, say, break down or change targets and objectives which we had. Some say 9% of the working places will disappear, is what some people say. You know, I don't know where the reasons or the basis for such statements come from. Thinking about the work of society now requires a lot of prerequisites. What are the new jobs, new work which is being created? I believe this is a very, very good, say, kind of prerequisite, but such that no, say, expert or economic pundit can say this is what the world will look like in decades of years' time. So today we might have, or tomorrow we might have an immediate, say, link to network, maybe some implants or some, contact lenses directly in your iris. You see, we will probably be embedded and move in a global communication space. So the question will arise, how can a person consider him or herself as a person, a subject in such a wide network? And, this endangers or jeopardizes the basis of our discussions, meaning we do no longer consider ourselves an individual. Then the transportation minister issued 25 statements saying, among other things, a person shall not become an element in a network because otherwise his individuality will be eliminated. And here we have to take into account new competitive and communicative aspects. So this means technology must be handled in such a way that a human being remains a human being. And this might be, you might say, the ultimate anchor of a discussion about common good. And it will also reveal an idea of what we consider ourselves to be, that is, social beings. Thank you.
Before the next panelists will be here, there will be a Q&A session. Or aren't there any questions? Please. My question for you, Professor. It's good to see that you underline the importance of participants in the debate. But what about the qualification? 2 million less voters in the US, and yet there was an election. Brexit. So people are discussing the Brexit in London, whereas we need low energy prices in Germany. And I mean, does it make sense if we have to build windmills in Poland or Portugal? So do you have any idea how to proceed or how to do things better?
Sie zwingen mich durch die Wortwahl meiner Devise.
The choice of your words forces me to, use a friendly move when answering your question. At the same time, differentiate. I have been a justice at the constitutional law in Germany, and I am a convinced or firm, citizen, firmly convinced in this country, I would not use this term of, say, mob or populace, riffraff. So in this case, you have to ask yourself whether or not this is correct. You know, Trump had fewer votes in comparison with Hillary Clinton. For those who know the American system, this is not a surprise. But, you know, this, if they had a different, say, election or voting system, then of course the campaign would have been different. But I believe your question reveals, and this is what is on the minds of many, that people are not, say, so happy about democracy. The Luxembourg foreign minister, after the Brexit referendum and even before that, he said we should do away with such referendums. Then for me, this is a sign that direct intervention of the electorate is not desirable because they do not understand facts and, say, figures of this world. And, you know, lots of things have happened in Germany, not because of any decision-making processes, but because of referendums. So was it the pressure of, say, the riffraff? No, it was a decision which was based on, you know, the votes of the electorate. And this is what is commonplace in democracies. And if you have this in mind, but nevertheless look at, say, dictatorships or other autocratic systems, then, you know, you seem to turn in this direction. So we left it open whether the common good on a national, European or global levels are identified and how it is identified and who is standing for reason. I believe we have to get used to the point that a modern society has got many points of rationalism, not only one. This time is over is a thing of the past. You see, many people are talking and we are joining in, and no matter what the final vote of the electorate will be, we have to live with it, and I think we can live with it. I am firmly and deeply convinced that our Western democracies are better than any other system out there. Professor Paulus, please. Can I ask a question briefly? You showed us the development. People have to be protected. Artificial intelligence might be a threat for us. So, you know, we started with Aristotle. Couldn't it be that the physe and these do exist? Something which is given by nature, it exists, and then something which is put into practice or into effect by law, by humans. So on the one hand, there's God and what he created, and people, what they created. So what if this, say, distinction is wrong? What about the development of artificial intelligence if this is nature, meaning nature uses us to develop artificial intelligence, and I'm sure we are going to hear more about it this afternoon. So in artificial intelligence, you know, machinery and the instruments which will become, say, active in the future, maybe we are the obstacle for that. How does all that fit into the overall concept? When I was a young student and assistant, I sneaked into the cinema watching the Terminator because I thought there is a problem in this film. So I'm open for questions like this. But I want to say, we, in the 19th century, as a result of industrialization and the formation of modern national states, so still in the spirit of political enlightenment, we developed the idea that the world is shaped according to our own ideas, and this on a state level. It In this case, people overestimated themselves, developed a hubris, and persons were pushed out of the center. Now this might happen when looking at the modern technological developments. Not yet, but it might happen. So something which you have seen in Terminator or I, Robot. You know, these are films which discussed this idea. I think it is all about shaping and influencing such technological developments. And you might say technology is like a natural event, then there's some truth to it. But there are many cases where we, on account of decisions as consumers or states, took decisions pushing technology in specific directions. So this is, say, imaginable too. The way we handle artificial intelligence will certainly require a discussion in the society, and it's starting right away. We should not pretend as if we've been eliminated and have to accept the dominance, the superiority of artificial intelligence. These are just constructs in the internet world, digital Allmende, shared economy, all buzzwords, wonderful world, but you know, they are pretensions which we can and must decide upon.
One more question. That's going to be the last one, please.
Herr Fink, Wolfgang Fink, ist immer gut, wenn wir den
Mr. Wolfgang Fink.
Fabio, vielleicht die zwei.
Fabio, let me talk about two aspects you mentioned. The process aspect, that is the process aspect, meaning we address aspects like this using, wearing legal glasses. Does that affect everything like digitization or digitalization? You know, the speed, the velocity of innovations is on the increase. So the disruptive energies which these things will develop will be such that we might have problems with the speed or the velocity, and how can we solve such, say, problems? If you back the system like you do, and I think the majority of people in this room also support it, but the question still is whether or not such developments, overwhelm us, and at the end of the day, we are going to have a situation like fake news. We face a situation which we can no longer control. Where does manipulation come from? And, we might no longer be in a position to, control such processes using our means. My friend Achim Berg, my friend from Bitcoin, gave a private presentation to me while we were traveling through Italy. And he pointed out that the digital development was linear, and now everything is developing exponentially, and we will be overwhelmed and overtaken. Have one aspect in mind. Since modern societies have been in place, let's say 500 years, such exponential leaps have always happened, not in the digital arena, but everywhere else in cultural and religious arenas. The way you use and handle monies. There have always been leaps like this in this world. We, as a society, have become more and more capable to handle such developments. We are no longer a 15th century society. We can even handle the financial system. At least I believe that. And this does not mean, such scenarios mean that people said a few years ago that it is no longer controllable. But today, well, we listen to presentations where the over or excessive regulation of the financial system is being, lamented upon. But, we cannot say we cannot control or regulate the digital world. 40, 50 years ago, people said we can't do anything in Europe because the most important players are sitting in California. And now there are requirements made by companies which will become very, very, very expensive for companies like Google's, the safe harbor decisions, all these decisions and judgments taken by the European Court of Justice. And the digital competition with this robust value creation strategy is, restrained, is reined in. I am optimistic, meaning you should not disregard negative developments. But we are talking about technical imperatives, if you like, and we, as people, can only, just sit back and enjoy this fully automated, brave new world, if you like.